From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello again. Well, look what's happened. Another week has gone by, and here we are with another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on your very favorite TV channel, Can TV. Glad to have you back. And also, this is the great relief edition of the show because we've learned this morning from AccuWeather, you know, the people who told us that we were going to have the coldest winter in the history of Chicago and that you might consider moving because it's going to be so bad. Those guys today said, oh, no, you know what happened? We didn't anticipate that all this tsunami debris that's floating on top of the Pacific Ocean is perfectly placed to reflect the heat up and back down to Chicago. So throw on your shorts, go back to the lakefront. It's okay. There's nothing to worry about. This is not global warming. It's just a tiny little thing.
It's an aberration.
It's a total aberration. And you got that from the president of the Cook County Board, so you know it's true. Toni Preckwinkle joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
And our old buddy Ben Joravsky, esteemed writer for the Chicago Reader.
You promoted me since the last show.
Yeah, well, you know, you are esteemed. There's no question about that. As is Madam President. We almost didn't notice, but there was an election a couple of days ago. I read it in the paper. It must have happened. There apparently was an election. And I know, Ben, you've written that you're a big, you've kind of become a Ron Paul fan, so I'm assuming that you took a Republican ballot?
No, I didn't take no.
First time in your life?
No, there was, my father, but I come from a long line of Democrats, and I've never, only I think maybe once or twice in my entire voting career have I left the path. I am just, unfortunately, you know, addicted to the party. But my father was threatening to vote Republican. I think he was just doing it to needle my mother. So no, we all took the Democratic ballot, and pretty much every candidate I was telling Toni before we went on air, every candidate I voted for pretty much lost. So
the Republic is safe then.
Yeah, the Republic is safe.
We can all breathe a sigh of relief.
Yes, if you assume that anybody I would vote for would be somebody you wouldn't want elected, you know, that old country club joke.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, it was a rough night for me.
Well, I mean, I want to be delicate about this, but you didn't have such a great night either, Madam President, did you? Some of the candidates you endorsed enthusiastically went down to defeat. I'm sorry to report.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is I'm very grateful for all the help and support that Christian Mitchell got. He's a very talented young man, and he was a candidate in the 26th district and won the race, I think, by more than 500 votes. So. I'm very pleased about
Politics
that.
being extremely local and this being more...
Yeah, the 26th district is half my ward, so that was very important to me.
Yeah.
You know, there's some high-profile people that I supported, and Joy Cunningham was somebody I got to know when she ran for the appellate court, I guess 6 years ago.
She was running for
the state Supreme Court. You know, fine candidate, very well qualified, to take nothing away from Mary Jane Tice, whom I talked to yesterday and congratulated. Rick Munoz was my colleague in the city council for 20 years, and a smart and talented guy who also unfortunately didn't win. So,
I mean, this is an interesting. This one, of course, is closer to home for you because Dorothy Brown, who won, is the clerk of the circuit court, so she's a county employee just like you are. And you know, you were kind of publicly opposed to one of the key people in the county government. That must be a little awkward the day after the election, isn't it?
I called her yesterday. I talked to her this morning, and I wished her well. You know, it's the people that you support.
So it was a little awkward then.
Well, yeah, but the people you support don't necessarily win. You have to make the best choices that you can, and you know, I've been a committee person for 20 years, and so I've always tried to support good candidates. It's just the people I supported got a little more attention this time, given my new job.
Yeah, I guess that is true. That is absolutely true, because your endorsement meant a lot more than if you were just another alderman, right? So the people were watching it a little more closely. So let's just stick with that Dorothy Brown thing for 1 minute longer. There were huge criticisms of her operation coming from all sides of the spectrum about how inefficient the place is and how undigitized it is and all that. Is that something that concerns you as president now? Now you've got another, you've got many years more of working together.
What I said during the campaign was that I'd known Rick for 20 years. He was my friend. He is a smart and talented person. I thought he'd do well in the job. That's, I think,
and you stand by that.
And that's what I stand by.
Okay, and then I really will get off of this, but I'm sure you must have seen Carol Marin yesterday, who kind of took you to task and said, she was talking to David Axelrod and quoting him, and then she says, "You don't endorse if you don't also intend to win, and there's a danger in spreading yourself too thin." What would you say to Carol Marin?
Well, first and foremost, I supported people that I believed in and that I had confidence would do a good job. She was critical basically for being loyal to people who it didn't turn out had a very good shot at winning. And if her basic criticism of me, if the only criticism she has of me is that I'm loyal to people who I think would be good and talented elected officials, I'll take that shot.
Okay, Carol, you can write that in your column. I know Carol watches the show absolutely religiously, so she'll have that quote. So, just a little bit longer on the elections big picture. There is a lot of discussion about the fact that Illinois now kind of becomes ground zero in the battle to retake the House. I mean, there could be 4 or 5 districts where Democrats have a chance of taking something back from Republicans. You guys buy any of that?
Yeah, didn't they gerrymander the map to make that happen? Isn't that generally how it goes?
Well, I think they redistricted.
Oh, redistricted.
Yeah. See, there you go again.
Yeah, there you go. I got to tell you, Ken, I was really disillusioned with my fellow Chicago voters, Cook County voters. The turnout was abysmal, and I realized I must give them this, that there were no high-profile races at the top of the ticket. What was the leading, in terms of the Democratic ticket, was it the clerk's race?
Probably the Dorothy Brown
okay,
race,
so
yeah.
most people don't even know what the clerk is. They, if they're lucky, we're going to get into this later, the criminal justice system, they stay out of their names have nothing to never enter the clerk's files. But it was abysmal. I mean, I was riding around in the Southwest side yesterday, and the voter turnout was lower than 20%, 15% in some precincts. The poll watchers would come in with numbers like 20 to 15 in terms of voters, and it's like a high school or grammar school election. So Chicago's voters are really, I think, it's hard to say they're at an all-time low in terms of their apathy, indifference, and ignorance, but it's really seems to get worse year after year. I view the high point of when I moved to Chicago, Harold Washington's election. What was the turnout there? It was some incredible.
It was a lot.
A lot of people.
Let's stipulate it was a very high number. Yeah.
So maybe people weren't motivated in some cases by the best and more enlightened of all interests, but at least they went out and voted.
Well, see, you just came to Chicago at the wrong time. That's all. You just
I came at the high point.
You thought it was going to always be like this.
I mean, come on. What was it? What was the voter turnout? 15%?
I don't. I'm not Bruce Dumont. I don't have this stuff in my head. I don't know, but it was very high.
Incredibly unenlightened electorate that deserves the government it gets because it doesn't participate, and then calls me up and whines about it when they get a speed camera on their corner.
Let me just say, I have a different view. This poor man has a pretty sour view of our electoral process.
He's too young to be
so
such a
here's
curmudgeon.
the thing. In a 4-year cycle, we have elections 3 out of 4 years. In most democracies, you do not have elections every single year. So, we ask a lot more of our citizens than in other places. If you think about it.
That's an interesting point.
So in the city of Chicago, you have aldermanic elections every 4 years in the odd years, and then of course in the even-numbered years, you have elections for statewide office, county office, Congress, whatever.
Right.
So I'm just saying, we have to keep in mind that we have a much higher bar in terms of involvement in the electoral process than other places. And let me just go back to one of the things that Ben said. I don't think it's necessarily true that you get the government that you deserve, but you get the government you're willing to put up with. And unfortunately, in the state of Illinois, our electorate has proven to be willing to put up with pretty abysmal performance by elected officials. And that is now and has always been troubling to me.
Yes. Well, I would just say this. not that I would ever want to publicly disagree with Toni, but
you will.
I
yes.
will. I mean, I don't know. What did they used to call it in the old days? Social promotions. You've just given the electorate of Chicago a giant social promotion.
No,
I mean,
I'm
it doesn't
not
take
at
that
all.
much to go out.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think
20% vote on a nice day. Now they're saying, Toni, the excuse is it was too nice a day. The day was too nice.
too
Oh,
hot.
I had to wash my car.
All right, so listen, let me just say, so when I was growing up, you couldn't vote until you were 21, and I voted in every single election since I was 21. I've never missed an election, so I'm not letting anybody off the hook. I'm just saying we have a very high standard in this country in terms of participation in the democratic process. But I believe that voting is the first obligation of citizenship, so I'm not letting anybody off the hook. I'm just saying we have to think about what we ask of people in a broader political context.
All right, you know what? Let's move on because we're here today for, I think, a loftier purpose than sitting around complaining about the citizenry. It was, believe it or not, it was as far back as last November that you were on the program, President Preckwinkle, and we started talking about...
Tony's a lot easier to say.
Yeah, well, whatever. It's President Preckwinkle. What we were talking about, and I want to get us into this conversation today, was the disproportionate number of arrests and convictions for minorities, blacks in particular, of course, for possession of marijuana in Cook County. Now, marijuana is believed to be in, Ben, I'm quoting you in a lot of this. We've got a lot of numbers, so I have them up on the screen so that I can make sure we get them right. Marijuana is believed to be used at similar rates in all racial groups, but African Americans account for 78% of the people arrested in Cook County. 89% of those convicted in Cook County, and absolutely staggering, 92% of those jailed for low-level possession of marijuana in Chicago and Cook County. I think it's the Cook County number, right? So the ratio of those who plead or are found guilty of possession of marijuana, black to white, 40-1. 40-1. About 90% of these cases are effectively thrown out of court. They cost the county taxpayers $78 million or so. They cost us 84,000 police hours a year. And that doesn't include the cost of keeping people in jail who can't afford to pay for their bond. That's an additional, whatever, $100 and something dollars.
$142.80.
There you go. $143 a day. So this is the situation we're in, and Ben, you and Mick Dumke have written, I think, absolutely beautifully on this topic. And I really want to try to just spend the rest of the program talking about this issue in particular and whether there's anything that can be done to address this. I mean, there are so many issues. You said there's a great quote from you that you'll take people's support even if the only thing they care about is the cost. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, if you don't care about the social injustice thing, the $78 million that's wasted might be worth some attention.
Or the $500 million every year we spend on the jail.
Mm. $500 million.
Yeah, $500 million. It goes to the jail.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the jail theoretically is just a place just to hold people temporarily.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, so what I've said about this is that the war on drugs is a failure, and that basically what we've done is criminalize large numbers of African American and Latino youth with our drug policies, and that's been devastating to them in terms of their life opportunities, because once you've been arrested and convicted for these, minor drug offenses, it's for many people on their record forever. Makes it hard for them to get employment. That's devastating to them and their families and the communities out of which they come. So we're having a terrible impact on the individuals, and the social costs are tremendous in terms of the dollars that we spend. As I said, $143 a day to keep somebody in jail, $500 million a year on our jail, out of a $2.9 billion budget. So it's a very significant portion.
Yeah, this is one thing that we do see eye to eye on, and that's the eye to eye on Chicago electorate. But I have to admit, Ken, I'm sort of like Johnny come lately to this whole issue, and it didn't really hit home to me until I think it was last year, where just one day I happened to be riding my bike to see a comic, George Lopez. So I was riding down Lincoln Avenue, and I saw a whole group of teenagers heading off to, I think it was called Peace Fest. It was a big festival, and they were all smoking weed out in the open, and I didn't think anything of it. I went to the George Lopez comedy show, and he was making marijuana jokes. And then it so happened that Mick and I were doing the story about going to misdemeanor court. So here I am. The whole marijuana is just an open thing that people do or joke about or talk about. And I'm in misdemeanor court, and I'm looking at all these young black men in those tan, what do they call them? It says DOC, Department of Correction jumpsuits.
Right.
I'm like, we're putting up with this? I mean, I was joking before, we ask so little of government. So one of the things I think is just absolutely essential is that we get rid of this inequity, this hypocrisy that is not only costing us a fortune, but as Toni pointed out, is criminalizing scores of black people for something that white people do all the time. And so it's become like, I am late to the cause, but it's become a mini crusade.
I mean, there's just so many things in here that are just stunning to me. But when you see this thing about, 92% of people jailed for low-level possession are black. The people who actually end up in jail, 92%. How does that happen? How do you explain that?
Well, what I've said before is that the jail is the intersection of racism and poverty. At every step along the way, you see the impact of racism. I'm sure there were police officers who saw that group of white kids going to the beach and drove right by, okay? So if the group of kids was black, would they have driven right by? So it's police discretion. It's what happens when they get before a judge. Well, police discretion in the first place to whether or not to pick them up.
Whether or not, right, exactly.
And then in the station, there's what's called station adjustments, which means they call your parents and have your parents deal with you.
Come pick you up, right.
Come pick you up and deal with you, or whether they put you into the criminal justice system. So do they decide they're going to deal with it on the street? Are they going to take some action or ignore it? If they decide to take some action at the station, do they call your parents or they put you in the criminal justice system? When you go before the judge, are you released on your own recognizance, or do they give you a bond that your family can't afford to pay?
Which then puts you in Cook County Jail.
Which puts you in Cook County Jail. When you go before a judge, does the judge treat you in the same way they would a young white offender if you're a young black or Latino offender? I mean, as I said, at every point in the system, there's an opportunity for the impact of racism to be seen and to have an impact on the defendant. And so you end up with all these cumulative decisions by police officers and judges and juries with a remarkably disproportionate result. And so what I'm going to do, what I always do, which is recommend to your viewers a book called The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in an Age of Colorblindness. And it talks historically about the way in which African Americans have interacted with the criminal justice system and the disproportionate results. And so the impact of racism in our criminal justice system in this way, disproportionate sentencing, is not new. It's just incredibly glaring at the moment.
Of course, there are plenty of people who have a slightly different explanation for that and say that police tend to be more intense in areas of crime. And in many of our large cities, areas of crime parallel with the black community, and that's where they're doing their most intensive policing, and those are the people who are getting caught in that net.
Yeah, but what do you define as intensive policing? Is intensive policing picking up kids for marijuana offenses? Or is intensive policing trying to deal with violent crime? I mean, you're accepting the view that intensive policing means picking up kids for marijuana offenses, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Well, I mean, of course, this is one of the things that I know you've had some interaction with the Superintendent McCarthy about this. You actually asked the superintendent if they could what? Well, you tell us what your interaction with him is.
What we've talked about is ticketing for marijuana offenses.
Right. And where's that going?
I talked to the mayor about it in January. We haven't had a conversation since. I'm hopeful that this is something that the city of Chicago, since it's the principal source of people in our jail, that the city of Chicago will decide to pursue. But it's not unfortunately, that part of it's not under my control.
Ben, I gotta go back to my cheat sheet here, but I believe it's 23,000 arrests a year are made by the Chicago Police Department for marijuana possession. This is low-level possession. 23,000 arrests, and that's the leading cause of arrest by the Chicago Police Department.
Yeah. By the way, we should thank the great Mick Dumke for all those numbers. He's our really numbers guy. But it's. I think it should be at the top of the list of what Chicago should be doing. And one of the most frustrating things about this whole issue is that there's a fear or reluctance on the part of so many of our elected officials. Tony's one of the few exceptions to address this, to even talk about it. I mean, I think pretty much if you have a private conversation with most of them, they'll acknowledge, yes, this is going on, I am aware of this, but there's a fear that they don't want to get too far ahead of the public on this issue, which I find interesting because my guess is, just random surveys, that the public would want a liberalization, to use that word, of marijuana laws. I mean, I'm for legalization. I don't know if everybody wants legalization. Maybe it's like a process we have to go through where we start with the decriminalization, you have ticket writing, sort of what they're talking about doing in Evanston. Although I have big problems with that as well. I think we're just going to be right back where we started from in terms of who gets ticketed and who gets thrown in jail.
And it just becomes another revenue source.
Revenue source, yeah.
Well, let me say, I'm in public life, and you take incremental steps in the direction you want to go, and decriminalization is where we're going. At least that's where I'm going.
I understand that I'm asking the wrong person here, but do you have a sense of where Mayor Emanuel is on this? You've talked with him. Do you think he's
I have no
ready
idea,
to go
and you should
there?
ask him.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I would say, but I thought I'd give it a shot. I have to ask the question.
Well,
So, Ben, where do you think Emanuel's at?
Well, he's on the fence. Essentially, it's not on his list. Rahm Emanuel, and I'm just saying this as an observer because I don't really know the man at all.
But you are an
as an
observer.
observer, been watching him for a long
paid
time.
Observer.
Yeah, he's a paid observer of Rahm Emanuel.
Right.
He's a very strategic political thinker, so everything is all about advancing his political career. So in this particular case, this is how he views marijuana. How does this affect my larger political career? Will it help me? No. Right now, it doesn't help me, so I'm not going to address this.
All right, so here's the thing. So I'm 65 years old. I'm going to run for re-election in this job. I don't have any other ambitions, so I can say what I believe is right. And what I believe is right is that our drug policies are crazy, and that what we're doing is destroying the lives of our kids, our very young people in the African American community, and spending an incredible amount of money on a stupid policy, which is incarcerating kids for drug offenses. For marijuana offenses. So my husband tells me every time I speak in public, I have to say this. We have 5% of the world's population, 313 million people. We have 25% of the people in prison or jail. 25%. 1/4 of the people in the world in prison or jail are in jail in the United States, prison or jail in the United States. So unless you think that the people in America are somehow innately more inclined to be criminals than the people in all of the rest of the world, we're doing something stupid and wrong-headed and just incredibly destructive to ourselves. And that begins with our drug policies.
So somebody other than Tony is going to have to take that point of view, and it just can't be the Cook County Board alone. They have to be in conjunction with our state legislature and our city council. Now that's just on the state level, because we also have problems with the federal intervention, where the federal government reserves the right to exercise its own drug policy. So even if a state passes its own referendum for medical marijuana.
But, Ben, you've written about this, that Commissioner Fritchie from the Cook County Board has taken a position on this, that he thinks that there should be moved to the ticketing or something like this. And he had a press event with a couple of aldermen who were courageous enough to stand up and say that they thought the same thing. And well, you tell the story. It's kind of an interesting little. For those of us who like to watch the Kremlinology of the way Chicago works, this was a fascinating thing that happened.
Well, what happened was essentially his press conference. The issue was hijacked. Danny Solis, who was an alderman who was not going to show up originally to speak on behalf of the issue, And again, it was just for ticketing, decriminalization. It was not legalization. So it was, as Toni was saying, an incremental step. He showed up and he said, yes, this is something I believe in. I think we should study this. So essentially, the issue became Danny Solis's. Now, Danny is one of the mayor's closest city council allies. So effectively what they did was they took an issue that was showing signs of movement, and they were able to bury it in city council, the back rooms of the city council. It hasn't been addressed since. And so that's why I say they don't want, as important as this issue is, as Toni was saying, what was those numbers? Astounding numbers. 25% of the world's population
in prison and jails
are from. As important as this is, and compelling as our society in terms of how we spend our money and what we do to our citizens, our elected officials don't want to address it.
All right, and the reason they don't is because starting in the 1980s, the Republicans decided that the way in which they could hammer Democrats was to accuse us of being soft on crime, not being willing to stand up to the criminal element in our society. So, you know, the worst thing that can happen to you, quote unquote, worst thing, is to be accused of being soft on crime. So, you know, elected officials have been very reluctant to talk about intelligent drug policies, smart drug policies, because they're afraid that they're going to be hammered.
There's no upside to it when it comes to the next election.
Absolutely. And
That's
you know
right.
what the irony is? Pat Robertson, when he came out in favor of legalization, which is an extreme point of view that only I share.
You and Pat Robertson.
Me and Pat Robertson, we see eye to eye on so many things. When he said that, he blamed Democrats, liberals, for our policies by saying they believe in big government. So Republicans have been using this issue to hammer Democrats for 20-odd years, so Democrats are afraid, except for Toni, to take a stand on it. And then he come around and they blame the Democrats anyway for the absurdity of it. So I'd say you can't win, just you might as well take a bold stand.
But there just are these issues, these kind of third rail issues that are so difficult that really the only people who can take a lead on them are people who are willing to sacrifice their political career for it. I mean, that almost
so
seems
I think, but I see if you put it that way, then nobody will do it. So I think what you have to say is, what I've been willing to say is, you know, this is incredibly costly and it's incredibly destructive to our communities. Let's think about this. As a citizenry, we have to think about the kind of criminal justice policies we're pursuing. We can't just, we can't just shut the door in the closet and say, this doesn't matter. I mean, it matters terribly. It has a tremendous impact on our budgets, both for the city in terms of its policing and how police resources get used, in the county, how our resources get used. Well, and people have to be willing to stand up and talk about it. And I agree with Ben. You know, there are a lot of elected officials who will tell you in private, this makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you're standing up on this issue, but that doesn't mean they're willing to stand up on it. So, courage is what I would say.
Courage. But as you've also said, if for no other reason, just for budgetary reasons, if you could take these, however many it is, I forget, 84,000 hours of Chicago police officers' time, you could really use that for something much more productive. Unfortunately, once again, we're out of time. We've gone as far as we can go with this, but I'm really glad you were here to talk about this. It's a critical issue that we're all facing, and I want to thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for taking time to talk about it.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
And also thanks to Rahm Emanuel for the great weather. We know he's been responsible for this, and we're really happy that he's
that was
given
Mayor
it to
Daley's department.
Oh, maybe yeah. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. Of course, you can find us right here on cable, but you can also see this program online right at this address. See this address right down here? Just follow there, and you can watch it online. You can also subscribe on iTunes too. I'm Ken Davis, thanking you for joining us, and whether you like it or not, we're going to be right back here next week at the same time, right here on CAN TV. See you then. Thanks.